Hey guys, Mountain River coming at you. I know a lot of my friends and family have asked me this question before about, how do you photograph in manual mode? And I know a lot of you guys have invested in expensive cameras and got a lot of nice equipment, but you've never taken the time to actually use the features that are on the camera. It was being specific, I'm talking about the manual mode on your camera, which is, you can hold your dial and you set it to manual right here, or however you have it on your camera, however it's laid out on your camera. You have a mirrorless camera, whatever type of camera you've got. If it's got manual mode, you can find manual mode. I promise you, if you learn how to work in manual mode, your photography will get immensely better. So let's get started. I just want to explain to you a little bit about it to help you get comfortable and maybe start learning. And so basically what it boils down to is, even like in the old cameras from the 50s all the way up to today's modern DSLR camera, like these cameras here, they all have the same basic functions in manual mode. You've got your ISO, which is International Standard Organization. You've got your f-stop, which is the size of the opening in your lens or your aperture, and you've got your shutter speed, which is how long you allow light to hit your sensor in your camera. And those three things. So you got aperture, shutter, and ISO. The ISO, let's start there first. The ISO determines the sensitivity of your sensor as to how much light is available. And you can control your ISO in manual mode to set it to where you can get the kind of quality that you want. Because when you get up here in the 1600 and above with your ISO, you begin to get a degrade of quality in your images. So you want to try and keep your ISO lower for a higher, sharper, crisper image. And so that's where we're going to start out. I'm going to explain that to you. The International Standard Organization is what it's called. Basically, all camera manufacturers go by that. It's a relative thing to where if you're at ISO 100, it should be roughly the same with no matter what camera manufacturer you have. Some cameras won't go all the way to 100. Some just go to 200 and above. Just depends on the camera. But you've got like with this camera, with the camera that we're filming on, you've got 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, 6400, and in some cases it goes up to 100,000 ISO. And the higher the number, the more pixelation you're going to get, the more noise you're going to get in your image. So in this video, I'm going to try and explain and kind of stress keeping that ISO number lower. But I'm going to start out and just give you the three comparisons to these three items. You've got your ISO, your shutter speed, and your aperture. Okay, your ISO, let's say stops. That'll be a term that you're going to see in all of these is your stops. So if you go from 100 to 200, that's one stop. If you go from 100 to 400, that's two stops. 100 to 800 is how many? 3, right? So you have your stops right here, and I think the stops actually originally came about by the settings on those old cameras when you slid out your focal length, and there would be stops on the board. I'm not sure if that's exactly where the term came from, but anyway, for this it works perfect. So one stop, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it goes on up in your ISO. It's the same thing with here, 1 second to a half a second. That's one stop. It's one stop faster, your shutter. One stop to here, that's two stops faster. One stop to here, 3 stops. And so on. And same thing right here. 2.8 to 4 is one stop. 5.6 to 8 is one stop. 2.8 to 5.6, that's two stops. So when I say stops, you'll understand what I'm talking about. I'm talking about going from one setting to the next. What you see here and what you see here and here is the way it would have been in like an older camera. Today's modern cameras, they also go in 1/3 stops. So for example, if we're at a 60th of a second, 60th of a second here, you would either go to 1/125th, which is basically double, or 30, which is half, right? Which would be 1 stop, 2 stop. So from 30 to a 60th is 1 stop. But if you look on a modern camera from a 30th, it'll go from a 30th to a 40th to a 50th to a 60th. Now that can be confusing, all right? But from a 30th to a 60th is 1 stop. But if you go from a 30th to a 40th, that is in 1/3 increments. So so if you're looking at your camera and you're going, I'm at a 30th and I want to go 1/3 of a stop faster, you'd go to a 40th, 50th, and so on. So your modern cameras are going to be broken down into 1/3 stops. So don't let that trick you with what I'm talking about here, okay? So those numbers that are in the middle of these numbers are your 1/3 stop increments, okay? So your ISO is the sensitivity of your sensor. Your shutter speed, that's how fast the shutter is open and close to allow the light to hit that sensor. So if your shutter is open for a half a second, so for a half a second you're going to have the light that's coming in through your lens hitting that sensor is going to be for a half a second. And then with your aperture, that is the area of the lens opening. So 2/8, that's basically think of it as a fraction, okay? If you got your focal length and you've got your lens, well basically it's 1/2.8 of the focal length. If you've got if you're at f8, it's basically 1/8 of the focal length. If it's 100 millimeters, it's 1/8 of that 100 millimeters. If it's 500 millimeters, then it's 1/8 of that 500 millimeters. It's pretty smart how they actually designed this, because that way you can have your settings will go from one. It doesn't matter what lens you have on there. f8 is f8. So when I'm talking about this, it could be with any of your lenses. That will all of your lenses will fit to this, assuming they have these settings. Like some lenses might not have that many f-stops on it, and some cameras go all the way up to, what, 1/12,000th of a second, or that's on the top end. But usually the highest is 1/8,000th of a second. So those are your 3 settings. This right here is what's going to put you into manual mode, and is going to allow you that flexibility. You can do whatever you want at that point. You're not being subject to what the camera thinks that, an aperture priority or shutter priority, or the rabbit or whatever those other settings are on your camera. You can be free to do what you want, control your image, and take advantage of all the features on your camera that you paid for. So these are the 3 things. So I'm gonna explain something to you and give you a little assignment to start out with on this video. We'll get into the finalities of this in some of the other videos, but we'll start dialing in on some of this. But for right now, I want to give you a general overview, and you can take it from there and start practicing. You can go to Barnes & Noble, go to Books A Million, go into there and look in the magazines like Black and White Magazine, View Camera Magazine, Archive Magazine, some advertising magazines. Start looking at images. It'll give you lots of ideas. It'll start coming together in your mind of how they did it. So, as you go along through here. So this is what I wanted to show you right here, just to give you an idea of how you can use your 3 things: your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO. If you look right here, you got exact same exposure. Okay, I don't know if you can see it clear, but right here, all these numbers going across right here, this is all the same exact exposure. Okay, so 100 ISO, 1/30th of a second at f16 is the exact same exposure as 1600 ISO, 1/2000th of a second shutter speed, and at an aperture of f8. The reason that all these are the same is because I'm just setting the settings in different places within each category. So a 1600 From 100, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 5 stops. So at 1600, it's 5 times more sensitive in the sensor. It's 5 times more sensitive at 1600 than 100. So so because of that, our shutter speed's got to be faster, limiting the amount of light that's hitting that sensor because this is so sensitive. And we're even opening up. We can open up the lens here because we're at a 2,000th of a second. So you can kind of look at this chart and see that you've got different ISO settings, you've got different shutter speed settings, and different aperture settings, but they all are the exact same exposure. So in future videos, we can dial these in and start talking about angle of view. We can start talking about why do you want to have a longer shutter speed? Why do you want to have your lens stopped all the way down to f16 or 22? Why do you want to have your lens wide open at 2.8? There's different reasons for that to give you different results with your camera, as you probably know. So we can start practicing with these numbers to get it to where you can control exactly what you want to control. So I'm going to give you an assignment, and what I'd like for you to do is set your camera up at ISO 100, or if you just pick an ISO that you want. I wouldn't go too much higher than say 400 to do this. And then start your shutter speed at say a 30th, or actually start your shutter speed at like 250th for that, and put it at f8, and then set your camera up on a tripod, and then set your ISO to 100, take a picture, and then without changing anything else, put your ISO at 200, take a picture. Without changing anything else, put your ISO to 400 and take a picture. I would just skip the third stops, the in-between numbers, because I want you to see the difference in these settings. So if it goes from to ISO 200 to ISO 250, you skip the 250 and go straight to 400. That way you'll see the difference, in full range rather than in the real subtle. You can do it real subtle, but go ahead and do it that way so you can actually see a difference. Then put it to 800 and take a picture. And you'll see that as these numbers get higher, your images are going to get brighter and brighter and brighter. And then do the same thing with your shutter. You can go either direction you want. If you go to a 60th, if you go to a 250th, that's 2 stops faster. 60th to 125th to 250th, so that's 2 stops. So when you go to a 250th, your image is going to be 2 stops darker. So I would do it the other way. Start at like 250th and then open up to 125th, and then go to a 60th and go to a 30th. Again, skipping the in-betweens. And then from a 30th, you go to what? What's half? If you cut that in half, what do you got? You got the 15th of a second, and then an 1/8 of a second, and then a 1/4 of a second, and then a 1/4, and then a 1/2 a second, and then 1 second, and just keep doing that without changing anything but your shutter speed. And then for the third part of this thing, I want you to set your camera to like ISO 100. Do this in like a bright area, and set your f-stop to like 100 at say a 60th of a second, and take a picture. And then, set it to 100 at 60th of a second, and then set this at like f8, and then take a picture. And then just don't change these settings. Just change your aperture. And go from, go start at 5.6, let's say. Go to 5.6 and then go to 8. It'll show all that stuff will be showing your display as you change. Like on this lens, the front command dial here changes the aperture. The back one changes the shutter speed. To get to the ISO, that's on the menu in the back. You can go to the menu to change your ISO. So some of these features are in the menu, some of them are on the command dials on the top of the camera. Every camera's different. But just do each one. Just set that at 100, and say it at 60th, and then change just this and nothing else. And when you go through the whole range of those numbers, you're going to start seeing the difference as to what each setting does. And then start practicing. Go outside and use the Sunny 16 rule. If your ISO is 250, is 200, then set your shutter speed to 200 at f16. That's the Sunny 16 rule. That will get you started. And then just start changing your f-stops and your apertures and start taking pictures and start seeing the difference that you're getting in these settings. And my advice would be not to be changing all three at the same time. Start out with one. Set your ISO, if you want to do an outside test, set your ISO at 400 on your camera, for your ISO at 400. And then go outside and start at like 250th and just move that up and down and see what you're getting. And then set that at one spot and then move this around and see what you're getting. Then you'll start to get a feel for what happens as you change these settings. And then practice, practice, practice. And that will get you into manual mode. And in these future videos, I will talk to you about what you can do to use these settings for to your advantage. So that'll be in the next video. Okay, so I got two things that if you want some advice on how to learn more about this, if you get Ansel Adams' book, book 1, The Camera, that talks about your camera and your settings. It's not for modern DSLR cameras. It's basically an older book. It's from like the 70s, I think. It's been around for a long time, but the principles are the same for your manual mode. And you can, except for the ISO, that usually the film just has a set ISO, but you can change that in your digital camera. But the other book is The Negative, and that talks about the zone system and how light reflects off of certain objects and how you can expose your camera to your highlights or your shadows and how to take proper meter readings and stuff like that. So you can learn a lot in this thing. This is what they look like. I've got two right here. I read them all the time, so that'll be a big help for you. But just start out. You start out doing one thing at a time. Like I said, start with your ISO, and then go to your shutter, and go to your aperture. Only changing the settings in each column. And you can start out in the beginning with your Sunny 16 rule, which is your ISO at say 200. Your shutter speed let's go at 250th with your shutter speed, and your f-stop at, let's say, f16 in the sun, and start right there. Or if you're inside in your room, you can set your camera on your tripod and really do a good test that way. So that's the best way to get started on it. I hope this video helped, and talk to you in the next video.